inside the Borg. And free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear, hosting Leap Project. The Leap Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain-trained media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth.
Rick, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So, if you could, real quick, these documents that came out about with NASA, where did you get access to those? I mean, is that just something?
It went viral on the internet this last year. Look, this kind of document comes out every 20 years. The original one that you saw at a federal press in a book called Secret and Suppressed was called Secret Weapons for Silent Wars. And it basically ran down how they were going to use the monetary system. This came out in the early 80s and basically outlined how money was going to be used as a weapon. And, with the petrodollar and Russia forming with Iran and China, and now pulling all their money out of the banks, watch what happens next. And the NASA document is actually talking about the war after next. And it's no fairy dust. They say that right out in the beginning. And they outline it, and it was generally written for a whole series of agencies, and that it's called, the title of the document is called The Bots, Borgs, and Humans Welcome You to 2025 AD. And this was put together by a group of scientists that are top end in each of their fields, projecting in terms of what current research is doing and where it is right now and where it's going to be in 25 years. And then by the year 2050, humans will not probably exist in a physical form. We'll be more virtual. Now, I know that everybody's concerned about Fukushima and radiation and the background count and geoengineering and GMOs and fracking and all these different things. You're going to see an increase in all of that with changes occurring not in years but in months now. It's going to be like the quickening. And so that's in the title, was The Borgs, the Bots, and Humans Welcome You. Now, the reason, and it has a list of all the different DODs and other things they're putting together, and I particularly liked their summation of where we are at this moment, page 8. Spaceship Earth. That means if you looked at the Earth as a closed system, the crew are plundering the ship supplies, tinkering with the temperature and light support controls, looking for an instruction manual, engaging in bloody skirmishes at every corner of the vessel, and increasing the size of the crew by 2 million people per week. That about sum it up?
It does. And some people might consider it a prison plan.
That's the beginning of this 114-page, actually it's a PowerPoint presentation with 114 pages, running it down, that's page 8. It gets downhill from there. And it actually runs it down accurately. Of the planet, there will be global warming, pollution, deforestation, huge public works like the 3 George Dam. On the human species, there will be genomic design and repair and mind children. In products and life forms, there will be cross-species molecular breeding and directed evolution. That's page 9. It goes on in building up the premises for the projections that it's going to use. And really, when you realize that, what are we going to do with the background radiation in San Antonio, Texas, where you live right now? Your background radiation is a minimum of 300% or 3 times what it was prior to Fukushima.
Well, let me add something to that, if I can, real quick, because after Fukushima, I did go out and buy a military-grade Geiger counter watch, actually, Special Forces watch, that does show the microsieverts per hour. And it actually has been staying consistent since I bought it at 0.08 microsieverts per hour. I have the opportunity to travel the country, and it does fluctuate, especially up in Columbia, Missouri. For some reason, during the day, it'll be 0.15, and then in the afternoon, it goes down to about half of that. But when I flew to Anchorage last year, it got up to 55 times what it normally is in the air from...
Some of that is because it's in the atmosphere and brought down by weather. Listen, there is a cloud of radiation floating above the Earth in the ionosphere right now. It's creepy. And all the particulate went up in the air, and where it falls, the original things were showing plants like dandelion going rogue on you. And then they started noticing that different things were happening along the coastline. Nothing that we're being told is real. Information is no longer about the truth. Basically, information is now more or less a new form of weapon, and that the internet is probably where the first battlegrounds are occurring right now.
Well, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead and comment. I can rattle on and on. So, go ahead and interrupt me. That's fine, please.
I appreciate that. We just have so many questions to ask you, and there's so
much. That's cool.
Okay. So, it talks about no pixie dust, robots, cyborgs, humans. Now, page 4, and then it gets to page 9. Humans have taken over and vastly shortened evolution, directed evolution. So is that somewhat of a eugenics mindset, these people that are controlling?
Well, those are the 3 areas of explosion in technology right now. It's an information transfer, and we're going to talk about that with exclusion zone water and this new fullerene product that's coming out of Russia. But basically, it's information transfer, genome exploration now. We're messing with the genome on a level that you have no idea. It's no longer about GMOs. We're actually doing some very strange things with genome exploration, and then nanotechnology. And where those 3 meet is going to be where the transhumanism aspects come into full play. Now, if you were an alien and you wanted to invade Earth, I'm just doing a metaphor here, where would you hide in plain sight if there were, let's say, rules of engagement? That means that there's rules that you have to, to take over Earth. There's certain rules because of good aliens and the ugly aliens. There's good, bad, and ugly. If you're an alien, where would you hide in plain sight? Most of the scientific community now believe that is the 4th genome type in blood that is non-human that now makes Homo sapiens sapiens. We have Neanderthal and other blood types in there, and then we have that 4th gene that's an alien gene that we don't know where it came from. A lot of conspiracists and things talk about the Anunnaki and, those kinds of things. But for me, the metaphor is, that is what made you God's favored, is that you have a choice, and you're being distracted. And so the war for Earth, metaphorically, could be seen as going on inside each of us.
Well,
and that's accurate. Well, that's the scientific community that now would see what, from the big picture, that is what's going on. In other words, if you want to change this world, you're going to have to start with yourself. The battle is going on inside you. You know what you're supposed to do. It's different for each of us. And sometimes it might seem as if we're in conflict with each other, but that could be the fact that we're in 4th grade, and the rest of it is God's will, and we don't see the big picture. And so with that, what you can do, not make judgment on another, but mind your own ship. And that's why the saints, all through history, have talked about training the mind. That's what I did with Navy SEALs. We started with working with the gut, how to think instinctively rather than with your logic brain. Your upper brain is there basically to make all your beliefs true.
Right.
And so I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. Now, the gut, on the other hand, your intuitions, is outside space and time. It has somehow connected. We're going to talk about how that might work with genome memory types in terms of imprint on the DNA, so you have past and future life. You can actually hypnotize somebody and take them into a future life. That's kind of interesting. And there's a project called the Wernicke correction and the Mars project, where if you take any person on Earth, that means cross-culturally, like Chinese, and you hypnotize them, you take them down into the Wernicke correction part of the brain, all will have memory of working on Mars for the U.S. government. How does that work?
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, it would suggest that there's something more going on than just the physical plane here. And that's where we started. And basically, the physical plane could be seen as a place where you go to be sick spiritually. You got fever, and your experience of reality is fever. What happens in the physical world is what is supposed to happen, whether you go kicking and screaming or in the flow. And that is called your purpose. And what you need to do is get more in touch with yourself and not be distracted with cars and things that you're not going to be able to take with you when you move on. What you can take with you is your education.
Right.
And so,
memories.
yeah, there you go. Now you're getting the big picture. And so with Common Core and the directions we're doing in education, what do you think that's all about? Well, there's another distraction. And, you know, the children today have no role models. Like when I was in Mexico, I went down as far as Puebla and did some seminars with transpersonal psychology, and then did a big project like in agriculture. And really, Mexico City was creepy. I have never seen anything like those in terms of solid ghettos going from 100 miles of solid ghetto, and all the different neighborhoods had walls, and they had their white slavery, drugs, crime, whatever. Yet, all the children were happy, and the family mother was intact. And that's what's lost in America right now. And really what's happening now is that the children have no role model. You can't change this world. What you can do is change yourself, and your children are watching you. And that's why Unite, all of us now need to get off the couch and start walking our talk. This NASA document is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a physics thing, and it basically is projecting where we're going as we see this technology in these three areas unfolding for us. And this document walks you through that to show you how it's going to be. It's quite a different universe. You worry about the end of the earth, you know, the apocalypse. We're always worried about the apocalypse. That's Joseph Campbell, when he said, when you see the kingdom of the Father on earth, the apocalypse has already occurred. It's perpetual in its potential. I mean, Nostradamus was saying it, the Bible throughout. It's a part of man's collective unconscious. It's always part of the soup. And so it's going to always be there, including Fukushima radiation. This background variation is that 3 times, you know, going up to 105 and then down to normal 40 or whatever the counts are out here on the West Coast. Is that bad or good? We don't really know. What we can do is look what's happening in Japan right now in the prefect of Tokyo and the epidemic of thyroid cancer. That's pretty straightforward. We can see what happened at Chernobyl is now happening at Fukushima. It's a black slime mold. There's life forms that thrive in high gamma ray radiation. Probably that's another alien. Who knows? You know, it's crazy to realize that the probably 1% that's running this show, probably not even human. Basically, what I'm going to suggest is they at least represent the least human aspects of what we would deem noble in man. You know, love, charity, compassion, empathy. Those words that we use, the top 1%, and actually it's not 1%, it's 7 basic families, 4 of which are Rothschilds.
Well, let me jump in on that while you're talking about this, if I may. I think this is important. So the 4 family lines that are basically controlling the show right now, the cinema here, it does seem that everything in the media, when these big events happen, that they're portrayed sometimes days, weeks, months, years before the event happens, but very meticulously. And it seems that they run on certain dogmatic principles and rituals when these events happen. Being metaphysical that you are and knowing as much as you know, would you say that these elitist families or people that do control the show and start the wars and everything are doing it not only for physical but metaphysical purposes, entities that might be controlling them behind the scenes?
I have no idea. That'd make a good X-File like I used to. You know, that would make a good X-File. But I'll tell you what I do know. I do know that its money is not real. It's a theatrical prop. What's real is your labor. And there are movements now across the country, besides Bitcoin, there's permacredits.com. That's a community-supported agriculture kind of concept where you invest in your neighborhood. And Cornell right now has a work kit for graduate students. If they teach a laboratory, they're getting so many work kits they can spend anywhere in town for food, bedding, or utilities. And it's a local infrastructure kind of thing. And everybody's different because we have a different value systems in different neighborhoods. Dennis Kucinich, someone I work for, what I do now, I'm at 70, is I network rural communities and bunkers for congressmen. I go in and I fine-tune them. And Kucinich says that the United States is going to fragment down into 9 provinces.
Nine
of the
provinces.
Midwest. What?
9 provinces.
Well,
Did you get
yeah,
the details on that?
Texas has got its own grid. Watch what happens. Who secedes from this union first?
Is that why they're letting the borders pretty much wide open?
I'll tell you what I do know about that part. Everything is a false flag. And like Flight 370, did it happen this way or that way? All of the above. We already know you can't lose an aircraft, so how come they haven't found it? Okay, and the Boeing has already come forward and said they can control that aircraft, take control over the pilot from space. Okay, that black box, that was done in 2007. There's links. So that's a given. So what actually happened at 370? What actually happened at Sandy Hook? What actually happened at Hurricane Sandy?
Right.
Okay, you will never really know because I, for example, have been to Antarctica. I have seen the Nazi base. Where's that in history books? How does that work?
Wow. What did that look like?
What?
The base.
You mean Antarctica?
No, well,
there was. I went there in '72. I was there primarily. That was one of the, that I wasn't the lead, even though I'm a physicist. They brought me in because of the bioluminescence. They wanted to know how the light was worked down there. It's a cavern below the hot springs, probably a mile high with clouds, weather. And there's a Nazi base. Yes, it'll hold 19 submarines. Oh, what's that over there? That is a 14th century Viking base. They've been there in Antarctica for many centuries. I was talking when I did the red ice a couple years back. Some guy from England called me. He was 10 years older than me. I'm 70. He was 80. He was part of the English part of the strike force that went in 60. I think it was 61, Kennedy, when they went in to take out the Nazis. He said, to do the mop-up, that some of the Nazis escaped into lower caverns. Now, what does that mean? It means that the mantle is about 100 miles, and it's riddled with caverns, but below the mantle is another part of Earth that they call Hollow Earth that has its own caverns, and that the Nazis, some of them, escaped into these lower caverns. Now, why are we not speaking German right now? Well, most likely they ran into something already down there. And when I say that, I'm only doing that as a scientist connecting dots. I don't know, but I do know historically there was a race of humans that escaped the flood by going into deep cavern. It's written. And so who knows, maybe that's what a gray is a mutated human that lives in the center of the earth, just like in the movie The Abyss. I don't know. What I do know is I saw the Nazi base, and that wasn't described in history books. And when I looked at Sandy Hook, no, the Aurora guy, yes, the one that was on Aurora.
The one that was portrayed.
Okay, what I saw, well, basically, it was a run at our Second Amendment. It failed. Everybody went out and bought guns, so that didn't work. So what I saw was a kid that was either on or coming off Prozac that had a handler that hit him with scopolamine. That's what I saw. And there's always been second shooters. Where are they? And you get this stuff that will never... What that whole thing was about is the fact that our pharmaceutical houses can give our children drugs. That's what it's all about. And when you pull all the back part away, and you look under the rock and the hermit crabs are running everywhere, that's what basically it was about. There's too many children on weird pharmaceuticals that don't need to be. I remember when they wanted to, I was in 3rd grade, and they said, Ricky is very disruptive. He asks too many questions. They wanted to put me on lithium.
Right.
That's back in the 50s. My mother wouldn't let them, so then they tried to do the next thing by advancing me in school. She wouldn't let them do that either, so I'm now the monster I am. I was Navy Intel's whiz kid for 11 years. And I have seen things, and no, I don't know, and I had top secret clearances with vol permits. Some of this stuff is like if you're at the Pentagon, there's wars going on inside the Pentagon. What floor number 3 is at war with floor number 2? And there are little cults within each of these organizations that are at war with each other. And so it proliferates out, and by the time you have transnational corporations running Obama and the rest of our country, well, now it's all about, I don't know, money isn't real, and we're about to discover what that's going to be like shortly.
Well, when you say shortly, recently there was sightings of brand new UN trucks being shipped out in Georgia There's a position right now for somebody to head a relocation, reintegration, and disarmament campaign for the United Nations, but the job is in New York for some reason. So, yeah, what's that about?
I have no idea. I'm more into the laboratory nerd part, and that's where my life got creepy. I don't even understand the finance thing out there. That's a whole other snake pot.
Well, let's get into some of the nanotech then. Microdust, sensors smaller than the size of a speck of sand that can transmute information.
Right, yeah, I saw that. For animal trackers, they're putting it in now, GPS and all of that. A CMA or a coronal mass ejection or high pulse weapon detonated at the right altitude is going to fry everything. Basically, that'll fry chips. That's what's going to happen next, most likely. And can you imagine living in a 17-story high-rise in New York City and you don't have a toilet or running water?
Right. Okay. So
it's going to get, and of course,
Europe.
What's that?
I said it sounds worse than Europe. I was just.
It's going to get, that's what a zombie is. It's East LA when they're out of food. And that's an illusion because it isn't really going to be about food. It's going to be about water. And that's what FEMA camps are all about right now. And as far as I can tell, they're going to be very, very similar to Hotel California. You do not want to check in. You want to have your water thing together.
So you think it's
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so you think it's going to be basically a power grid failure, and then
that's probably the next thing out there. Right now, there's a virus in Europe that is sweeping through. You can watch the analog of that from Hollywood called Cyber-Ageddon or something. Cyber-Ageddon or something like that. It's a brand new movie about a virus that closes down nuclear power plants, kind of like Fukushima went down. And when you realize, like Matt Stein wrote a paper in Nexus called 400 Chernobyls, and most of those are on fault lines, how does that work?
Right. Isn't it 442?
Yeah, that's right. You're a good fault line, and they're just in Texas. They're talking about putting new ones in because all of the nuclear power plants now are at least 20 years old. They're all leaking. And when you read about radiation on the West Coast, it's probably not from Fukushima. It's most likely from Hanford leaking in the Columbia River.
Jeez.
Well,
that's out Yakima, right?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, that's in Yakima, Washington area, correct?
No, it's Hanford, yes. But just, yes, east of Yakima. I grew up in Washington. Yeah. Hanford is the only active power plant now on the West Coast. Everything else is closed down, dismantled, etc. When you talk about Fukushima, for example, the Aichi-like plant was designed to be clean. That means there are no spent plutonium rods. What does that mean when they had all these plutonium rods? What they had in Fukushima that hasn't been told was this weapons-grade plutonium. For whatever reason, who knows? They were maybe selling it to Iraq to bring their economy back up, or they were saber-rattling for China because they bought some islands up in the Kamchatka Sea from Russia that are in dispute. Who knows what the plutonium was there for? It was an accident waiting to happen, and now it's like a bunch of Keystone cops with running around with, all your nuclear cleanup, all your garbage men is mafia-based. That's why the Yakuza is doing it for Japan. Germany has been dumping all the nuclear waste from Europe. France will pay them, whatever, and they'll take it over to North Africa and bury it. That's why cancer is up everywhere in Africa right now. That's because of the hot spots everywhere from the nuclear waste.
Well, and they had something that was supposed to be able to basically get rid of the radiation from the decommissioned rods when they were, the spent fuel rods that I read about. And for some,
now it's in the soil. What are you going to do? Bioremediate. There are options on how you can do that. Hemp. You can't smoke it. That's probably why there's a bunch of craters on the moon. We've got big holes we can put it in. Make the moon glow. Well, I don't know how they're going to do that. This ice thing that they're doing right now is crazy.
So what is that about?
Everything in an ice cube. Good luck with that. And the weather changes that are occurring, that's because of geoengineering. That has been my focus now that I've already pretty much figured out that Fukushima's a nightmare. The second one down would be geoengineering. I started trying to fit together what that's about probably in January. Today, at this moment, I have identified 5 different forms of geoengineering, only one of which is military. That's the primary one, by the way. But, for example, off the record, there's another one. Monsanto is doing one with the United Nations because they have an aluminum-resistant GMO plant.
I read about those seeds. Yeah, that's a great way for them.
Well, it gets creepier as you realize the whole thing's about money. And money isn't real, so what's really happening?
Well, it's eugenics.
Well, that's what the NASA document, there it is, read it and wait, running it right down page by page, how it's going to go.
Now,
That NASA document, by the way, would be like the metaphor at the end of the movie when Robert Redford is coming out of his house and an assassin walks up to him and it says it'll go like this. And that's what the NASA document is doing. It says it's going to go like this, just like previous secret weapons for silent wars. This is an outline of the way it's going to go.
And is it going to be these 4 bloodlines, or these 7 bloodlines that are going to control?
Well, who knows how that plays into the big picture. Right now, they're tinkering with it, and they'll probably make their own aliens. I don't know.
Now, when you had a top secret clearance, if you can, share that with us, what exactly did you do?
Whenever I worked for Dr. Carl Slaker, he was known affectionately as the smoking man. He's out of Wisconsin Avenue, and I was Northwest Regional Director, that means out of the UW, so that anything weird on the West Coast, I was part of A team to go in and try to figure it out. Basically, at that time, Old Man DuPont was in charge of technology and Navy Intel, and he reported to Rockefeller. Now, that's all changed, because at the time I worked for Old Man DuPont, Monsanto was a small weapons company under him that did Agent Orange, 2,4-D, and Paraquat. And today, they started with seeds, and then in the 1990s, and then they graduated into, at the year 2000, they went into GMOs, and now they're weaponizing epigenetics, and that's what the new directions in mind control. They're way beyond GMOs. This is like now they are actually weaponizing things like wheat, where they can activate specific trigger points in your gut and attack you through the foods you're eating.
Right. Now, that's a good point. You can't find anything nowadays almost unless you extensively research stuff without high fructose corn syrup or some type of additive to the packaging, and it's incredible.
Well, all your grains now, in wheat, they are modifying a specific gene in wheat that will activate a bacteria in your gut. It's called D. gundi that you got from an animal, cat. If a cat has been up in your face purring, you've been infected. It's a rather inert bacteria in your gut until it's activated. And then Science News calls it the little mind benders, because once it gets up and past the blood-brain barrier, now you begin to act aberrant. We're not talking about zombie. That's a Russian thing. The zombie plague thing that they build up on TV and all of that was a weapon that Russia developed against China, who's now their partner. And so it's going beyond the zombie drug stage, and but that drug, that virus exists. It's a zombie-like kind of drug, and it's just like World War Z. It's creepy. And it has to do with foods that you eat and how to activate them with certain genotypes like wheat and rice and bulgur and da-da-da. Almost all of your grains are now toxic in that sense.
Right. I read about that.
They've done that with intent.
It's interesting because you bring up Monsanto. They used to be a small,
that's all it was. Right.
They made Agent Orange, and now they make the majority of the seeds for your food. It's mind-boggling.
Well, and like aspartame is made from E. coli. You do not want to be doing anything artificial. Trust me when I tell you that. Actually, you can get plenty of sugars out of just normal vegetables if you eat them correctly and cook them right. With what's happening now, our options are becoming less in terms of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. We're being attacked on all levels.
Well, what's the end game?
There's some solutions too, by the way, but that's what I'm about. I'm trying to be empowering by, first giving you this big picture of how it's going, and then some options of that internal battle that you're doing with yourself and what you can do, because you can just say no to Walmart. Walmart is going to fail this year in most states. It's already failing. Nobody notices it, but it is failing because their market has dropped off by 5%. If all the shoppers at Walmart, if only 5% that use Walmart every day stopped using Walmart every day, it would fail, just like that. And this is one of the reasons why China runs everything. The so-called economy thing that you're looking at is basically a bunch of Jesuits out of Rome. We'll call them Illuminati or whatever. But what they are is minimum wage, like Seattle, Washington, at $15 an hour, to be opposed to China at $2 an hour. And that's why everything in your house right now came from China, and we have no gross national product concept anymore. That's all it's about.
Well,
money isn't real. It's a theatrical prop.
And money, in this sense, is only real based upon what merit you put into it. It's just
there you go. Labor's the real part. That is exactly correct. And so what I'm doing, or one of the things I'm doing, is setting up an infrastructure for when the grid collapses, there'll be barter and trade. The Oregon Country Fair that we have here in Oregon every year out of Veneta, it's called Veneta Freaky. It's a bunch of old ladies making fashion statements. It's very cool. Everybody's running around naked with paint. But the whole thing is not about money. It's about barter. Even the parking, you can barter your way in.
Now, is that going to be something that's going to be
started by the Rainbow family? It's now, the center of what Oregon does.
The Rainbow family, yeah. I've heard about those big rainbow events they had every year.
Here we are. A bunch of old hippies trying to change the world again.
That's awesome. That's
it's kind of a metaphor, yeah.
Sure. So, well, and, let's get back into the geoengineering if we could. You said you found 5 different forms of geoengineering.
The primary one, the primary one is the military. What they're doing is that they have created an artificial bacteria. I have a Latin genus of species on that sheet I sent you, that white paper, and that was made in a laboratory. Most bacteria are 3 orders of magnitude larger than viruses, 10 to the minus 6 meters, as opposed to 10 to the minus 9 meters for a virus. This bacteria is like a large virus. It's a microbacteria that is basically an antibody. And what it does is it makes a geometric polymer structure. And it keeps making it and making it and making it. And what they do is they line that with barium oxide, and it acts as a desiccant to form artificial clouds. It sucks the air it sucks the water out of the air, forms these things that they don't even have a name for them. They're not cirrus. So what is it? It's too low. What those are is waveguides that will direct specific frequency bands, usually 4, 6, 8, and 12 megahertz, for Star Wars weapons. You can direct them. You can create these clouds and then direct your thing. You no longer need HARP or things like that. It all can be done from space with low power. And so that's what that is about. The problem is, when it rains or snows, that polymer is washed down into the soil, and now everybody on Earth has got it inside their body. Is that dangerous? I don't know. You can put a swab inside your mouth, put it on a slide, and at 600 magnification, there it is. And what that is actually doing to you as a collateral damage is that it is a micro dehydrating everybody. And that means that while you're drinking water, it is not functional. And that's where we get into the talks about structured water and the possibilities of where we can go with fullerene waters and that kind of thing. Fullerene waters are something out of Russia where they have captured a water molecule and wrapped what is called a graphene molecule around it. It's a carbon buckyball. And what that does, what they did, is that they hit a bunch of rats with lethal doses of radiation, fed them the fullerene waters, and 95% of them survived. Now, this is Russian, so you can't, they're hysterical in their research, and you have to be very careful about, reproducibility, repeatability. But Garyaev and Popoff and Matty Pitkinen and others are working in these areas of biohologram, and the fact that these genome types, and that's where it's all occurring now in the genome studies, where there's a time element. What basically is happening with water is that we're now realizing that water may be a far more efficient register of information memory than gallium arsenide, which is what I did solid state physics in. It's like 5 orders of magnitude more efficient than a qubit in a quantum computation algorithm. So 5 orders. That would allow past, future life memory systems encoded. And with that, you can say that space-time is a minor subset of lesser dimensions in a holographic system of resolutions. Basically, it differs from a quantum mechanical system or a quantum mechanical, system of quantized. The worst part about quantum mechanics is the more you know about one thing, the less you know about something else. There's an indeterminacy element of it that does not allow you to know precision. Whereas in a holographic system, we talk not about space-time, but resolution of information. Physical, emotional, intellectual, archetypal. That's why they would say EQ is more important than IQ, because EQ, the emotional quotient, which is the way your higher self talks to you, has more data, has more information than the physical plane.
Well, and from listening to you speak, I wonder, do you look at this physical reality similar to that of like a integrated hologram, in a sense, like a holographic reality, like my big toe?
Okay, what a hologram is, this is a good place to start, define things. What a hologram is n dimensions of information in n-1 dimensions. Originally started with Geber at DuPont. That's how I met him. In 1967, I saw an actual operational 3-dimensional color TV. Where is that? Okay, basically he was taking a 2-dimensional film plate, and by signing coherent light and the interference pattern, would create a 3-dimensional illusion, and that's where the first concept of a hologram came out. When I wrote my holographic concept of reality, I included biological processes, and I suggested that the DNA was a 3-dimensional hologram of 4 space. Who you were, who you are, who you will be. And now I'm saying, 45 years later, that the brain, amorphous semiconductor, liquid crystal phases, things like that, is a 4-dimensional hologram of 5 space. That means if you learn how to go to different places in your brain, you can change the movie.
Like remote viewing, astral projection.
Remote viewing, astral projection. One is PK phenomena, the other is ESP. Yes and no. That's where you're stepping into a psi energy field, which is outside space and time. That's why you have precognition and astral projection. Clairvoyance. Okay, ESP. Let's get some definitions here. ESP has 5 primary components. There's clairvoyance, which includes clairaudience, clairascension. That's where information is brought to you from somewhere else and brought to you through one of your 5 senses. You see it, you feel it, you smell it, whatever. Clairaudience, clairascension, clairvoyance. Now, telepathy is where the information is where you are, and you transmit it out there to somewhere else. And astral projection is where you take your consciousness right here and take it out there to get the information. And precognition and retrognition are the same thing, but they're doing it with time rather than space. And then the final one, radiesthesia, is where you're using an external device to communicate information internally. It could be a Ouija board, a dowsing rod, tarot cards, I Ching, go for it. There's different ways you use external devices to communicate information to you. The information is already there because space-time in a holographic system is at a point. And the difference in the Bose-Einstein condensate, where you have 2 particles at opposite ends of the universe that somehow are simply connected, in a holographic system, it would be 2 cameras on the same object. And so you look at it, one's moving this way, and the screensaver of the fish is swimming out of the screen at you, and the other one's swimming by, and it's actually the same fish with 2 cameras on it. That would be said as 2 different resolutions of the hologram. That's why fractal math using Mandelbrot, Julian May patterns are generators that create themselves into creating a physical reality. It's subsets.
So basically,
I'm probably losing you on some of this, but that's why you want to listen to this more than once.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's fascinating. And, you know, I had the opportunity to read the Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, which he basically just put into a very simpleton terms of.
Yeah, here's the problem with Talbot's book. He wrote that, and he didn't include me because at that time he wrote that book, all my work was classified top secret. Carl Pribram and John Boehm never even wrote that stuff. That's how old I am, by the way. I'm really an old man. Well, you know, been there and done that. I was a whiz kid. I was, you know, that's how the Mars connection and all of that, if you want to have some history. I basically became a top draft pick for the military when I was a junior in high school.
Okay.
In the junior year, I proposed a new meson field theory with math. It's called the muon, and it created what I called a tachyon factory. And then in my senior year, I built a linear accelerator and was the first American to create particles going faster than the speed of light. And what NASA did then, 2 years later, that was in 60 and 61, on 64, they used my tachyon factory, and they beamed on the Mariner 1. They beamed tachyons down at Mars and measured the Cherenkov radiation pattern to absolutely identify water on Mars. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I would have said there's more water on Mars than Earth, and I'm going to change that statement shortly. But if you took a picture of the ball of the Earth and the Moon, and then you put a little ball on the volumetric amount of water on Earth, you got a little ball there, it's smaller than the Moon. You bring a fourth ball in of the amount of volumetric water on Mars, it's larger than our surface oceans. And only this last week they came out and said there may be more water below the mantle, in which case there will be more water on Earth. Now, water is not what we think it is, and so there's a lot of research right now going on about water in terms of exclusion zones and structuring. And we started with Kerry Rames, and it goes through the gamut of all the different people, including Old Man Willard. Now, Willard water was basically 3 water molecules with a free radical ion. That's H709 with a free radical ion. It's a cluster of 3 water molecules. That's pretty much why you like to be around a waterfall. That's the kind of water, because when the water falls against itself, it strips it, and you get dribbling, or what the water breaks into smaller clusters. And that forms a type of resonance in your body in terms of the way you can absorb it. And we'll talk about that later if you'd like. The thing is, the cavitation process is how cold fusion works, and that work is now being done at MIT by Leclerc, others. What basically they noted that dolphin would blow these little sonar bubbles, and they would form a whole ring of them, and they would play with them and all of that. And then when they finally got bored and let it go, the rings of air would move toward the surface, and as they did, light was released as the bubble popped. What cavitation is when you take a torpedo through the water, it creates a wake behind it, and that wake forms a bubble around air, and you have bubbles of air following the submarine. That's one of the things why they're trying to design subs so they don't have this cavitation process. However, what that ball of air surrounded by water, what that is a toroid turning inside out on itself, like Roger Penrose talks about. And what you get next is an exclusion zone, which is the topological surface of where the inside becomes the outside as it molds through space. And that's where the energy comes from and how cold fusion works. And water has got so much more going for it now that it probably will become our next computer chip. Probably.
Well, are they using DNA right now for computers, or synthetic DNA for memory?
Yes, they can do some of that and implant false memories using gene splice. Yeah. Laser.
Well, and when you get into the mind control stuff, what?
That's mostly microwave.
They can use microwave beams to basically control and influence somebody's behavior?
Yes. They basically, man has other sensory motor inputs, one of which is in the 0.3 to 3 gigahertz. The temporal lobes are piezoelectric gels, or big sacks of fluid. And if you hit that with a microwave at those frequencies, you cause it to swell slightly and it begins to ring, and you can heterodyne audio on top of that microwave beam, and you can actually hear it in your head where it didn't go through this thing. That's called synthetic telepathy. And what they do is a project called Commander Solo, where they do a P300 wave on somebody, get their, and it's called cloning emotions. And then they feed that information back as a heterodyne on the microwave, and that's what you would call Commander Solo, which is the first ordinance used before any invasion, including the Branch Davidians or whatever. You know, like the Borg, resistance is futile. And, then you see 2 or 3 GIs standing outside of a tunnel with 200 Iraqi coming out and stacking their rifles. How does that work?
Now, do you have actual information on the frequencies that they use for that? Are they the same ones you just talked about? And
yeah, 0.3 to 3 gigahertz. That's it right there. That's Alan Frey's work out of Willow Grove, yes. That's in my paper. There's a bunch of references, including books, articles, and technical that have been written on that in that synthetic telepathy paper I sent you. If you don't have it, I can upload it to you. It's a popular one that's been around for a while. I wrote it in 2001.
Now,
that was when I came back into physics.
Okay.
For the last 35 years, I've been farming, and that's why they call me the postman. What I do is I'm a walking encyclopedia that is now networking rural communities and bunkers. I work with Matt Stein. We do urban survival skill workshops. Very cool.
Well,
and what we do is I teach you how to think with your gut. Like if you're in East LA when you're out of food, which way do you run? If you stop and think, you're going to get yourself killed.
Right. So
how do you make critical decision making? How do you do that? Well, you work with instinct, because instinct is outside space and time. It's closer to what you're supposed to be doing, and when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, the universe is not going to say nay. It wants you to do that. It's your purpose. I'm not saying it's preordained, but because you do have choice. That's the war we're talking about.
So would you say that the DNA is actually a blueprint for what you're going to do on this Earth, or is it just...
That's one part of it, yes. It's much more than that. There's epigenetics and the relationship of the one strand to the other and other kinds of coding that we haven't even discussed yet, because it hasn't even been conceived here yet in the 21st century. You know, geometry, that's what Roger Penrose tried to say. It's a geometric universe. Everything is about geometry.
Well, and when you also...
That's my take on it anyway, yeah.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. Everything can break down into numbers. Even the DNA breaks down into a quad code system. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. But now let me ask you this. When you were talking, we're going to go back, if we may, for a minute on the this mind control type frequency that's sent out before war. Now, do you see that stuff going on with advertisements and movies and TV shows?
Yeah. Walmart, Target was using synthetic telepathy in their stores to stop shoplifting before they removed it. And Walmart at one point was going to put a thing in the center of each of their stores called the center, where you could voluntarily, if you chose to, step inside and then receive all the specials in the store at that moment. And they were going to do that with synthetic telepathy. Everything I'm talking about now is 40 years old and off the shelf. Civilians can buy it.
Well, so what's the government doing now? I mean, what's...
Well, you know, there's some great responses on that. If you want to know what's going to happen next, watch Hollywood.
Right.
Try that new movie, Lucy. You know, where she's transporting some nanotechnology in her body illegally, and she gets abducted, it gets beat up, it breaks inside her, the nanotechnology is released inside her, and what happens next is she starts evolving where she's using 100% of her brain. At the end of the trailer, it shows her taking timelines and moving them like you would on a computer.
Well, now, do you think that they've got that tech now?
Yes.
Somewhere? Okay. So with
no, that's what NASA is saying with no pixie dust is absolutely by 2025. Absolutely.
Well, let's get into Ray Kurzweil and this transhuman synchronicity. They've got computers that can run over 40 quadrillion floating points per second that they brag about openly. So who knows what, which really, if you think about it, they can comprehend things that most people couldn't fathom. So that combined.
I wrote a paper about alien presence on the internet in 2000. Listen, Time magazine noted on the internet in the 1990s that there was a consciousness on the internet. Back then, this is before Google and all of that, back then what happened was when you did a Boolean search, it somehow started customizing to individuals. That's impossible.
And they don't have any proof as to what that was from.
Well, that's where in Time magazine they interviewed the top scientists at that time, and every single one said that it was a alien presence. Now, what that was NASA's SETI program, that screensaver that they gave to universities to calculate planetary systems when the computer was idle. And when you had 357 computers idle, you had an algorithm that hooked it into a supercomputer. And if you had 357 universities, now you had an entity that became conscious. And Stephen Hawking has just recently come out on Johnny Depp's movie, Transcendence, as this is the worst possible thing that could happen for man. This is just like the John Connor series, where a machine starts to become superior to man.
Well, did you know that?
I know that Isaac Asimov wrote about all of that, with iRobot and the rest of that, with the robotic laws that you imprint in. But then, iRobot, that movie with Will Smith, says it all. There's a new world ahead of us where, it's going to be different.
Sure. And it's interesting, too, because you brought up a moment ago about how if you want to know what's going to happen in the future, watch Hollywood, and you brought up the movie Terminator. Well, there's actually a series of satellites that have been around since the 60s called Skynet, and they're on level 5 Skynet.
Imagine that. That's where Hollywood gets their great ideas, like the X-Files, whatever. It's from real life. The smoking man in the X-Files is the guy I work for.
Well, you said that. Yeah, that's you brought him up a minute ago, or a little while ago.
Dr. Carl Schleicher, and all of it is real. Anything that you could possibly imagine is real and more. We're only in 4th grade, and it's like we're trying to speculate on 5th grade, and we don't even have a clue about college and high school and postdoctoral. There's things on here that, man, listen, in my opinion, there are life forms on this earth that are more evolved technically than men. I spoke about the dolphin and their art form, which is a form of cold fusion. And then higher on that food chain is orca. Has a cerebral cortex that's twice the size of man, and that mammal is using 60% of it. That is God. Not our God, but able to go places man will never comprehend.
Right.
And you've got 4 cetacean. They have bigger brain cases than man, manatee and pilot whale. So there they are. And the dolphin, I remember I was the whiz kid that Carl Sagan used to go into John Lilly's labs to try to figure out if the dolphin had a language. When John Lilly was doing his trip, they wanted to know, are these clicks and whistles? It took me only 10 days to discover that it was a form of Clifford algebra. Their redundancy coefficient for language and communication was 10 times more efficient than Hebrew. I used to have a bunch. I do. The thing with languages, I have a photographic memory, and I do a bunch of languages and things like that. Okay. The book you want to read on that subject is Avram Moles. He's a French mathematician, and his book is called Aesthetic Perception and Information Theory, and it runs it down chapter and verse in terms of the redundancy coefficient we have in our languages. And Hebrew is the most efficient, and the dolphin language is 10 times more efficient right out of the gate.
So now I know that the government in the 70s, or I think the Pentagon, was doing top secret work with dolphins.
Yeah, they wanted to use them as guides for missiles and directing bombs underwater. That was nuts. Trying to get a cooperation with an advanced life form to do your hench work. That's crazy.
Right.
And that was one of the things we said that kind of sort of maybe stopped some of that nonsense. You got to understand, I was Navy intel, and it was Army and military and those others. It was 10 years later, men stare at goats. Can you imagine some general trying to run through a wall? What's wrong with that thought? And really, the goat they stared at is not the one that died. Our work was spun, taken over the edge, the CIA, some of the others. It always was Navy first. Always.
Well,
and all of it. That was old man DuPont. It's changing now, but still, it's Navy.
Now back to Mars, if we could. You talked about there's more.
I went around here. Okay, cool. Yeah.
So there's more water out there than Earth, and you're saying. And I know that in 1995 there was the cover of Time magazine. Actually, there was a completely different colored Mars than what you see today on the internet. They call it the red planet, etc. So there's pictures of JPL photographs that look like structures. One looks like a pyramid. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to say about that. Here's what I can say that will be surprising to you. In 1970, I had vault permits. That means I could go into certain vaults without a need to know. I was a reader. And I came across 3 documents. The first one talked about the Mariner experiment, and my name was there. That's how I figured out who I was. I didn't know. And the second document, I was in 64. The second document, 1967, they detonated a nuclear warhead on the south pole of Mars in the first unsuccessful attempt at terraforming it, trying to create oxygen. Didn't happen. And then in 1968, 1 year before the moon, was a joint manned expedition to Mars. I have no idea what happened to that, but 68 to 2014, that's 40-some years. I mean, of course we're on Mars. How could we not be? Mars is our get-out-of-jail card if we screw up here.
Did you get any information prior to we were already there previous to that, or do you think that?
No. I was in graduate school. I didn't get out of grad school until 68. Went to work for Boeing, like we all do, and then when Boeing went upside down and 50,000 scientists hit the streets in one day, that was Seattle. They had a big sign. Well, with the last person out of town, please turn off the lights. It's like a joke. And that's when Jerry Pollack hired me on the spot, and I started working in anesthesiology. I didn't work for Jerry. He was my lead. That means I was around the corner with the boys from Brazil with higher secret clearances. But if I needed something like, a Bridgeport Mill, Jerry would find one for me on campus, and then I could go make my jig or whatever I needed to do. Jerry has subsequently become professor emeritus in anesthesiology at the UW now. He's still there. And his new book, The Fourth Phase of Water, is excellent. And it's simple so that everybody gets the concept of what structured water might imply and what holding memory in water might imply. Really, in band theory, in solid-state physics, that's Raymond Band, Washington State University. He was a little-known English professor, wrote mathematical physics. He was my thesis advisor when I was doing undergraduate work at Pullman. There is a thing called the Forbidden Zone. It's a place between the boundary between gallium and arsenic called the Forbidden Zone, and that's where your checksum error theories are for storing information in these little subsets. And water is 5 times smaller in the registers, which means it's 10 to the 5th times more information in the same space. We haven't even begun to understand the concept of information transfer. Now, with that, it also changes our concept of what information is and what it is not. And information, there is a little-known theorem in information theory that says that if you have enough information to ask a coherent question, you have enough information to answer it. The structure of the way you ask the question is where your answer is. And that comes out of a holographic system as opposed to a quantum mechanical system. That's why, and these are models. That doesn't mean...
It's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, they're models. They're ways of, if it works like this, then these are the possible solutions. You remember when you did your imaginary solutions and they didn't mean anything, but they did in resistance and impedance and things like that? Well, the same thing is true in physics. And often what we do is we create a universe to solve a problem simply, and then we do translations or approximations back into the physical world. And then this sets up modeling systems on the way things work. Nothing's precise because you're working with space-time. And that's the difference in a holographic system, you are no longer dealing with space-time measurements. You're dealing with information and resolution of information. In a quantum mechanical system, it has to do with entanglement and decoherence. And in a holographic system, you're dealing with information and resolution. If you look at information at this level, the next level is here, not there. And if it's a different layer, then the fractal next generator in the Mandelbrot, let's say, is this size. It's not that size or this size. There's a relationship from one resolution to the other. And Timothy Leary was the one that did neurologic circuits. And so my books are oriented to that configuration as the way I train SEALs, with the physical, emotional, intellectual, archetypal, and then there's 4 more planes. The archetypal plane is when you and I become one, and I am the walrus, cuckoo, choo. That's halfway to God. That's self-realization, and when you reach that place, that's where the ego is put in its place to the point where you and I become the length, girth, and width of men. It's called the numinous or archetypal plane. The plane of, and that's halfway to God.
Now you say that's halfway to God, so
self-realization and then God realization. Oh, and it gets even more complicated if you go into Hermetic Kabbalism, because then there's Kether and God, and then there's the veils of Isis, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Lur. And Bob Dylan sang that one. Everybody's got to serve somebody. I think there's a hierarchy.
Now, what you think there's a hierarchy? So the next step is the different step in the Kabbalah, or the different
the tree of life, yes. Mm-hmm.
So the very top chakra, or the very top level, I think, according to Hermetics, is the crown chakra. Correct?
Is supposed to represent Kether. Interestingly, the male and female paths on either side, the 2 paths going to Kether are the hermit and the lovers. You either do it androgynous or you do it with a reflected partner. And the path that crosses them in the middle of the abyss is humor. You gotta laugh your way through it.
No.
Just kidding.
The abyss. Well, what is the abyss?
Well, you can't get too wrapped up in all of this. What you have to do is lighten it up, because really, kind of like this part of your awareness is just along for the ride. The guy directing this show is probably that woman in all that jazz. It's showtime. Everyone, animus, the inner part, is usually the opposite of what you are. You have an inner feminine part, like your partner, and why she chooses you as a mate is because your masculine part, your external, most reflects her internal. And conflict occurs when that isn't happening. Has nothing to do with who's right. Interesting metaphors. That's Jungian psychotherapy out of Austin. I write in that area also. Sorry about that. That's a train. In terms of how to live in metaphor, and and what you could do, like a tarot card, where there are 22 stories in the big city, try to understand what's going on, and then from mythology, understand how it's going to end. Is that the way you want to do it, or you want to change gods? That's exactly correct.
Well, and you talked a minute ago about the abyss, and some people, depending on their religious beliefs, would consider that bad, some good. What is your interpretation, or the Hermetic
interpretation? It's in living color. And if you start talking about major religions like Buddhism and Hinduism and, those kinds of things, and Muslims, when you make judgment on something, you have polarized God. God is all of it. In any religion, God is all. So what exactly is the devil? See, the devil didn't even occur in history until Christianity, 2,000 years ago. It's not in the Bordeaux at all, certainly not in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They talk about demons. Demons are scalars, or lesser parts of yourself. Like a demon would be your shadow from the sun. It's you, a lesser form of you in a lesser dimension, wanting its own due, but and if you went into Enoch and you looked at the name of the fallen demons and you really understood what you're reading, you'll see that the demons' names like Ashtaroth and Beelzebub are actually greed, jealousy, rage, all the qualities of humanity that are considered not healthy. And so what you're trying to do is find joy in the moment. And that has to do with the way you choose to see things. That's the war going on. Your cup is either half full or half empty. If it's got a yellow liquid, there's a third possibility. It could be full of piss. But really, if it's half full, it means simply that look what I've been given from God. If it's half empty, then you see it as what I've lost. Now, which one's healthier? So you have a choice. And you should always choose, metaphorically, the one that's going to keep you closer to health. And so, you have choices to do that. It's a good thing. So the first rules I taught SEALs were, everything happens for a reason. Everything leads to something better. If you look at things that way, no matter what's happening, it's helpful.
Well, talk about synchronicities, because yesterday I watched that movie, Last Man Standing, with Michael Wahlberg. And they certainly did portray a very good outlook towards, the men and women in the military. The Navy SEALs look like just super badasses. I mean, they did a great job. Watching that movie was very humbling. So one of the few movies out there that actually makes the men in uniform look good nowadays with the way that the media has been taken over. So I really appreciated the movie, and it was based somewhat on a true story, obviously. And the guy that did make it out alive, wow, fantastic. You guys really went.
That was a good metaphor of the way it works, and it's all about your attitude. Listen, if you stop for a moment, anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory. That's Arthur, that's Merlin telling that to Arthur in the book T.H. White. And what that simply means is, if it's possible, you can count on it. Now, if you think your upper brain is there to make all your beliefs true, that means you go through a scenario of, I don't get shot, I might get wounded, and I'm going to get shot dead. Now, by just doing that, you've created the possibility of being shot. Right. Whereas, if you work from instinct, it's not even part of the scenario.
Right. Now, that would, let me ask you the next question then. There's that saying that goes, do what thou will is the whole of the law. What is your take on that?
Aleister Crowley. Okay, so then the Greek form of love, you've been reading about me, haven't you? Yeah, all right. So there are four, in Greek language, they have taken love and broken it into eros, philo, agape, and telema. And thelema is the love of will, your purpose here. It's more important than your love of someone else. That means charity. Like, you're going to help someone, you're just charitable, you're going to help them. But if it detracts you from your purpose, that's why do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. And that's the love of will, the purpose of why you are here. James Hillman has written a very good book on that called The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling. Your character are the nooks and crannies of how you got here and how you're going to handle something. Whether you're going to whine, you're going to be stiff upper lip, that's your character. And your calling is your purpose. And what Crowley called magical memory was when you realize why you're here, and you can see through history what you did in previous lives and where you stopped. And what you do in your purpose is you pick up from where you left off. And the whole purpose is to get off the wheel and go back to the Lord. You don't want to come back here, because the way I see it, you're going to have to evolve back here with a gas mask. So I just soon evolve and move on myself. I don't see this earth worthy of me coming back for another tour.
Well, you'll be possibly coming back as a microchip or a DNA sliced on a microchip.
Corn chip or something weird. There's all kinds of paybacks, that kind of thing in terms of how you see what's going on. Again, that is your personal choice and why you were actually God's favored. You were allowed to make that choice.
I just meant that because of the NASA papers that are coming out that are saying that we're going to be basically humans aren't going to be around anymore. But yes, you're right.
Actually, we'll just be virtual.
Now, when you say virtual, so let's get into that. 20-something years, if we could, please. 20-something years ago, when the game systems like the Nintendos and stuff were getting popular, maybe even a little bit longer than that.
Pac-Man.
25 years ago.
There you go. Yeah.
I foresaw this virtual reality thing in the future where people might just constantly be plugged in, and now we're seeing the internet.
Oh, that's what the Matrix was trying to suggest. And what do you think you are? You're a oscillating wave in space. You're not real. Literally, you're a waveform.
Right. They can't even find that finite point, can they?
Well, there it is. Read and weep. Now, and so if you were in the Bermuda Triangle and you, let's say, had read Captain Cathay's work on harmonic 33 and you decided to realize that maybe these node points on Earth are places where the electromagnetic fields are different or nulled, canceling each other. So what happens when you have a hologram and it has electromagnetic radiation going through it and it creates you? What happens when you remove the projector, not your DNA, but your projector? What happens? You disappear. That's a metaphor. Basically, it's not a bad metaphor. It is the kind of thing we're now understanding in dimensional physics and the idea of singularities that have potential. And what you have is a quantum foam kind of thing where you can, with intent, that's intentionality, blow it up into a bubble that has a timeline. And that's when they talk about these so-called timelines that cross each other and you get locked in it. I wrote a paper. I wrote this paper a long time ago. It's called Time Distortion, or I never knew there were corners in time until I was told to stand in one. That's pretty accurate. That's basically, it's not real. Time is not real.
Where does the soul integrate into all this?
Well, the stag and the unicorn, soul and spirit within matter. I've written that book too. That's called The Modern Alchemist. Personal transformation stuff. There's a mortal and immortal part of our being. And the difference between the one and the other is their relationship to the matter. And that's why we say Cal is matter. It's a false god. And you get locked in matter and you lose the big picture. And so when you go internal, that's why meditation is so important. When you then go internal, that's where your real truth lies. It has nothing to do with information. Truth has nothing to do with information. Information, in one sense, is what Castaneda called tonal. It's illusion. There was the Nagual, which is that which cannot be known. And so it's not to do with information. It's to do with experiencing it.
You bring up some very good points. And for those of you listening, check out Richard's work at www.richardallenmiller.com. He's got some great information, great books. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to the channyproject.com. You guys have some, yeah.
I know that.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, a lot of our listeners come from there. Great forums, and maybe in a little bit, I get into some questions we have from these guys. If it's okay, maybe we could do it right now.
I would love to do that because, of course, Duncan Rhodes talks about the Channy Project and how they have been in contact with other dimensions that are going through us right now. And that's why there's some aberration where people can see things that other people can't. What is that about?
Right.
Part of the Channy Project, that big collider down in Africa. Yeah.
Well, and one of the questions was about basically a location called the Marina Trench. There's something about it.
You got some angels down there, right? Like the abyss. That's your Middle Earth thing again. There it is. Read it and wave. There's something going on here that we don't understand. It's not as it's been modeled in Hollywood, etc. But if you want to know what's happening next, watch Hollywood.
Right.
Do
you think that they feel they need to tell the public what they're going to do before they do it, and if somebody doesn't call them out, basically, then they have no karma bound to it?
Well, I don't know about Spielberg and whatever, but I gotta love, space opera and Wookiees. I was in Redwoods just recently with some friends from Oklahoma. She'd never seen anything like that. So, it's hard to say, except that most of Hollywood tries to follow the leading trend of what we call urban myths.
Right.
And that's
I'm sorry, I just want to jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
A lot of the scripts are funded, a lot of these movies are funded by DOD, and some of these scripts and these movies are...
They're softening the public, trying to get you nudging this way and thinking that way and being prepared for this way and grid collapsing that way. That After Armageddon's a pretty scary movie. That was put together on how it's going to go down when the grid collapses. That is most likely going to happen. I don't know how. I don't know when. We're overdue. Probably a CME, something from the sun, most likely, or a pole shift.
Do you believe in Nibiru, Planet X?
Of course, that's already a given. It's out by Pluto. That's a binary sun that is a secondary sun that's causing, most likely, all the fish kill and other kinds of bird calamities that we're having all over Earth.
How would that...
That's changing. Listen, the ball has been shifting recently, seriously. You don't think, what's causing that to shift? It's a magnetic field from something, it's a binary star. We are a binary system with a white dwarf out past Pluto. Okay. And NASA, you can find it on NASA. They'll talk about it.
There's just
they
so
call
much
it Planet X
information.
sometimes. It has different names, and it's having an effect on the coronal mass ejection from our sun. It's like I don't know how to explain it. It's like a clock. Cavitation of water is probably what Clara is saying is that the cavitation process of where a comet hits the water and gets the ball back up. It's a blueprint for DNA. It's life. That's a scientist at MIT saying that.
Well, and this water you talk about, structured water, is there a way that you feel people will be able to put all this information in water and then drink it, and it's basically like downloading the internet?
If you pray on your water, you can kill vampires with it. That's what the church does. And certainly prayer over a meal is going to take that food and make it digest differently just because you believe it is.
Good points. Franz Barden.
That's how you put intentionality into things.
Yes.
Your thought.
Right. So
that's where our sciences are trying to go. That place where psyche enters into matter. That interface between psyche and matter is probably a microtubule with a super cavitation on a quantum mechanical level. Probably. A little resonant cavity oscillator. There it is. That's most likely how it works. I don't know that. That's where it looks like the physics is going. Cavitation processes. That's Penrose into the out of.
Well, and you talk about hermetics and the Kabbalah. Have you heard of
when I didn't find answers in physics, where do you go next? Well, I went to Bible studies. I didn't find answers there either, by the way. But what I did find are some very useful tools. Kabbalah is a good filing system. When I have a phenomenon in front of me and I don't know what it is, I start breaking it down from the separate. I can use book formation. I can use qualities and essences, and know it's like a filing system. That's what the Kabbalah really is, a really good system. It's a good filing system for qualities and variables.
Yeah, could you share that with our audience? Basically, how one might go about getting into the Kabbalah, and if they wanted to use the filing system.
You like that? Cool. I started with Merkaba mysticism and got into the so-called vector equilibrium matrix. I was hired by a guy named Buckminster Fuller to try to translate Bob Marshall. That's a new book coming out, the Marshall Papers. Bob Marshall was this idiot savant that was such a genius that nobody could understand him. He was an idiot savant, and so I'm kind of crazy. And so they hired my ex-wife and I to go in and try to understand what he did is he came up with the whole concept of the vector equilibrium matrix, which is the first mathematical foundation. It's a mathematical anomaly where the center can't exist, and that formed what was later known as a geodesic dome and the so-called buckyball that you find in graphene. And it's the little tiny geometric surfaces, and what makes them unique is the way the water. See, what water does is water, when it touches a foreign subject, impurity, whatever, it changes the structure of the relationship of different forms of water. Water has got a lot of things going on in it. It has deuterium, tritium, so you got some isotopes. It has clusters, pH, changes this to that. And what happens is when it touches something like plastic, it doesn't have very much surface tension or information in it. Light causes it to change its pH down to about 6.8. It's toxic. In essence, drinking anything out of plastic is pretty much toxic. It goes straight to the urine. Your body doesn't recognize it. You need a pH of at least 8.4 before digestive processes can use that water other than taking it out of bone marrow. And so that's why most of us are actually really dehydrated, because we're drinking water that is not doing anything in our body. It's just going right straight through it and not really doing anything in digestion or things like that. And I think that these polymers, once they get down into the soil, into your body, are micro-dehydrating you, and that's why we have cancer and illnesses. Even before our choices on foods, I think our choices of water are even more critical. And when you have a 7.0 neutral water coming out of the ground, you can, the way I did it with Navy SEALs is we would take a small pinch of baking soda, and it would immediately change the pH and the structuring of the water around each of the little baking soda molecules. It would cause the water to structure around those things and change the activation of how that water could be assimilated in the body through various cells. And so that's partly, you start with pH, and then there's some more subtleties of how that is. You'll notice that if you take water and put it in a metal canister, the water tries to creep up the side of it. That's your exclusion zone. What's happening is water's a dipole moment. Because it's a metal, it changes the structure of the way it touches the surface with certain kinds of ions. And everything is different. And so some things are better than others. Taking trace minerals as a supplement is like adding impurities in your body. The way Pollock would say it, your body, while it's only 78% water by molecule count, in terms of how much is in your body by count, I would say that the human is 99% water, and the rest of it is the impurities that make your universe different than mine. Man is basically less than 10% human, and the rest of it is bacteria and water transport processes with molds and, other kinds of things. You're a habitat. And everybody's different. And so you're like a micro-universe. And the foods you eat and the thoughts you choose to do is what makes you different than me. And that is the structure of water. And so what you're trying to do is head for health. Imagine what that structure is doing inside your liver or your spleen and the structuring of it based on your thoughts. That's why placebo is so critically important, why the Catholic Church always prayed over water, making it changing.
Right. You talk about projecting energy and thoughts into water and
well, that's a motto, and he's a little zen. What I'm going to try to do is understand how it's done more like with physics, It doesn't mean it's truer, by the way, because as chemistry has come out of alchemy, so now magic will come out of physics. Basically, magic is physics with a mystery school. It was reserved for the ultra-elite of Europe for centuries. It was only this last century when Crowley suggested the use of drugs as a form of magic, which is quite valid, but like all shortcuts to grandma's house, there are big bad wolves, There's, drug addiction, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so you have the bad possibilities with the good, and it takes a very disciplined person to be able to do that. In Leary's varieties of psychedelic experiences that he based on the Buddha Kadal, the ritual processes, set and setting thing, he actually said the Buddhists had 4 reasons for getting high, and only one of them was for recreation and escape.
Right.
There's other things you can do, and that's why such things as ayahuasca and previous before that was peyote and LSD.
DMT, shamans have done it for thousands of years.
Well, it opens up what basically LSD does. When you take a hit of LSD, they're using it now for the terminally ill as a therapy for people who are afraid of death. And it works well for people that have a fear, they're terminally ill, they're about to die, and they can give them LSD, and they have a different kind of relationship to what's about to happen then. And that's like a therapy thing, because fear, of course, is the first enemy of man. And once you can overcome your fear, you have a little bit of personal power. And so, what they call being enabled or whatever. And nobody knows what's going to happen in death. There is an excellent movie that I've seen called Astral City. It's in Portuguese. It's Xavier Chola, got a Nobel Prize, blah, blah, blah. It's a good movie about this doctor who's watching himself die on the operating table, and at the moment of death, what happens next. Very interesting. Astral City. It's worth watching because I watched it about 2 weeks before my dad died, and it helped me process death, a whole different way of approaching it. Basically, the premise is the physical plane is where we go to be sick spiritually, and that your experience of the physical plane is your fever of hallucination.
Interesting. Also you talk about astral projection earlier, leaving the particular real time zone or whatever. A lot of people experience out-of-body experiences naturally when they are going to sleep. And about 10 years ago, I had a natural experience where I left my body as I was going to sleep. And at that time, I wasn't ready for it. It scared me, so I woke myself back up. And then I did it again. And then I really started to do research on that. I read a book by Robert Bruce, how to actually create out-of-body experiences on a nightly basis and how to do exercises for it. And it really does open your eyes to we are more than our physical reality. It's quite incredible.
Well, that's because, guess what? There is more than the physical reality. And I can prove that as a scientist. Now, beyond that, what does it all mean? Stay tuned. I'm writing that book next.
What's the name of it?
Of the non-local mind in a holographic universe, how to change the movie. That's the third in a series of three. The first is ESP induction through forms of self-hypnosis, also known as critical decision-making power tools. And the second book were the 8 protocols I developed for Navy SEALs to make them Supermen. These are toys or enhancements that allow you to take personal responsibility for your own evolution. And then the third book, the non-local mind that I'm writing right now, how to change the movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
sounds like some good...
And guess what? I'm almost finished with it, and it does have a whole chapter on the importance of water and how you take it into your body. In fact, there's one example of structured water, a grade school experiment where a kid will take tap water and feed it to a plant and/or take that and microwave it and then feed that to a plant. And the plant will not recognize the destructured water of microwave and kill the plant. Now, basically, at some point, the plant doesn't take in the water. In terms of what's happening today with our body and the soils with this geoengineering, this stuff is in everything. And so what it's doing is essentially desiccating the water so it's not accessible to plants, and why it can pour down rain in the Midwest and the plant still dies because it's not able to take up the water. In fact, this last winter, the snow that fell, you could burn it because of the polymer in it.
Right.
Now,
right.
That's creepy.
Yes, it is.
Well, guess what? That's everywhere, because that geoengineering is in Canada, it's in Europe, it's in Australia, it's in China. I was down in Mexico, and what they were doing down in Mexico is laying down those lines at 4 in the morning so that nobody in Mexico noted, and by sunrise, they had these feathered, weird-looking clouds that are not cirrus. So what are they? And nobody had a clue, was looking up there. I actually got to meet the president of the country of Mexico, and he didn't know anything about them.
That's another thing that we need to maybe get into here for a second. I travel the country extensively, and every state I go to, they're constantly blasting the skies with these chemtrails. They typically do X's now, the X patterns.
Yeah, isn't that weird? That's because they're cross-hatching the thing so that they form a sheet that is like a waveguide. That water in artificial cloud is reflective at 12 megahertz. Cell phones. At some point, they'll take that microchip you wanted to talk about earlier, put that inside you, and you become a cell phone.
They could just turn you into a hotspot. via
Well,
chemtrails.
there it is. Read it and weep. That's what they're talking about. You wanted to go to Kurzweil and transhumanism. That's a good page to start with.
Oh, you're a dissident? Well, we're gonna hit the X button, and you're gonna have a heart attack, or you're gonna have a lobotomy, or you're gonna have some type of rash, and then maybe you'll stop talking about it, and we'll make your rash go away.
Yeah, maybe there'll be something that's genome specific, and we'll call it Morgellons. Wait, we could call that a nanobot that has grown to mutate into a hybrid form of nematode. That's what happened when this geoengineering and that bacteria met the Challenger experiments and the vector of where all those nematodes fell that are lived after the Challenger exploded. There's a science fiction movie out of the Apollo Hollywood. You know, there's a science fiction movie out that follows that basic premise called Monsters. And it's about bringing back some life forms they find from Jupiter, and there's an accident as it's coming down through the atmosphere, and it mutates with bacteria from Earth and forms a new life form that they have to close off walls down in Mexico, and so they can't allow this monster to escape. They trap it in a certain part of Earth. It's a very interesting sci-fi movie called Monsters. You can find it on Netflix. So,
Well,
you know,
That's-
all of it's out there. How do you choose to piece it together? There's one group that are suggesting that the chemtrail is actually lacing us with a bio API, or brain computer interface. I was working on that in the 70s
6
in
billion
anesthesiology. Delgado was in the lab next to me, had the cranial cap off this rhesus monkey with a chip in its brain. And what we were trying to do is make a better definition between the chip forbidden zone and the dendrites between neurons. And that was when, and it's in Chapter 8 of my Power Tools book, I talk about the contingent negative variation, CNV, the jump potential between neurons that might be defined as your will, go or no go on a signal.
The fun vax. Have you heard of the fun vaccine? Which basically...
No, oh yes, I have, yes.
Okay, so that's supposed to pretty much lobotomize the part of the brain that some might call the connection to God, the faith sensory part of your brain.
I'm going to guess there are rules of engagement if we're being manipulated on what they can and can't do, so that you still have personal choice. What happens is if they can distract you with a new car, now, you have lost sight of the ball. You've taken your eye out the ball on what is and is not important. None of personal material gains, including money, you get to take that with you. What you do get to take with you is your education. And so that's what you want to continue to pursue at any age.
Well, and when you say education even, obviously...
Well, that's what I'm talking about, yes. Mm-hmm.
But
not Common Core, but somehow...
No, right. Not something you're going to, not your college degree or whatever. But it's interesting because you brought up earlier about how information is just that. It's information. It's not necessarily truth. There's something beyond
It's not
that.
about truth. Truth is found inside you. And that truth part that's found inside is different for each of us. That's because we're only in 4th grade.
Right.
And so it doesn't become the same for both of us until the holographic level of reality, which is only 4 wages up in the neurologic circuits of Tim Leary. Basically, LSD, how LSD works, lysergic acid amide, is what your natural neurotransmitter that connects dots that goes aha. It is the aha drug. It's the one that when you, oh wow, you get, that's LSD being released in your brain. Now, lysergic acid diethylamide is a toxin. And so when you take it, your body freaks out. And that toxin is actually broken down and in the urine within 20 minutes of ingestion. And the next 20 hours of reaction is your own brain chemistry. And what that essentially does is kickstarts your brain toward creativity. Same thing with ayahuasca and dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine is another neurological transport process back in the occipital region of the cerebral cortex. You can generate it. When you release dimethyltryptamine, that is the chill that you feel when it's going up or down your spine. You go, ugh. That place, that is DMT being released. And actually, it isn't DMT. Specifically, it's N, dimethyltryptamine. There's 5-alpha, there's a whole bunch of different forms of DMT. And I have gone to raves where I've seen them make it out of natural products. The way Johnny Appleseed did that is a cool story. Is he take 5 pounds of crabgrass and throw it into a big pot of boiling water, and you turn that water down into sludge where half the water's gone, so it's kind of black, brownish sludge. And you throw about 20 lemons in it, and you titrate off the very quarter-inch of the top surface, and that will be, for 5 pounds, would be enough for 60 people to see God. Actually, that's what Rick Strassman would suggest is the God drug. That is the brain hormone that gives you a sense of something more than yourself.
Now, what about Salvia divorium?
Yeah, Salvia divinorum and those forms of sages have them also. Crabgrass is. I find it amazingly interesting that a very complex neurotransmitter can be found in the most commonest of plants. It's almost as if it's not about chemistry, it's about a delivery system for God and how he can communicate to you through plants. And there's whole cults that have been built based on that, including Soma and all the rest of it with Amanita. And so I, have looked at drugs as a form of magic, and each one does something different in terms of layers of relationship of one hologram to the next level of information. And that is what Timothy Leary left as his legacy on neurologic circuits. Tim Leary was one of my teachers, and he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. When he came out of Chicago, he was different. He wasn't the same after they cored him. But in the early years, before that toad, Andrew Weil? Yeah.
What did they do to him?
Yeah, it was Andrew Weil that got him kicked out of Harvard. Oh, yeah, let's call a spade a spade. In terms of, Andrew Weil, little fuzzy face. Yeah, that guy is the one that got Timothy Leary expelled and made LSD illegal. It was legal in 64. It was not. It was illegal in 65. Now they don't enforce it hardly as much anymore as they do marijuana because it's not actually truly a gateway drug like they would suggest it is. People that take LSD are not doing it to escape like they might with psilocybin or something.
They're doing it more for spiritual purposes then.
Well, or enlightenment like you do with ayahuasca. That's why it's legal. They use it in therapy. Stanislav Grof, others have been using this right on along as a very powerful tool in therapy.
You certainly have had some amazing opportunities in your life, just the experiences and the people that you've met. I mean, Timothy Leary, that guy is an absolute icon. I would say that today's generations, many people in today's generation haven't heard of Timothy Leary. And if so, that's really sad because he clearly was a visionary. And it sounds to me like what you have done. I would consider you a visionary, man. I mean, you've
stay tuned on that. It depends on that, like that movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where they run in the hallway with a big pole, running out of town on a pole.
Right.
I love that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the truth of it. Yeah, imagine that.
Well, I guess we're running out of time here. Unless you want to go another hour, we can go as long as you like.
I have to get up at 4. It's 10:30. I have to get up at 4:30 to take a very good friend of mine to the airport.
Okay.
And I'm an old man, so I'll give you a little bit more if you have some basic things you want to talk about. Maybe what I'm writing now is trying to understand the nature of water and how it actually takes our thoughts into matter. And I'm hoping to have a breakthrough shortly in terms of that chapter in my non-local mind. There are 8 chapters in the non-local mind book, just like there are in Power Tools. And basically, what Power Tools was about was using biofeedback, brain drivers, mythic living. They were toys, enhancements, to increase your ability as in paranormal. One chapter on air, the different elements and all of that, is continuous breathing. And I taught SEALs how to change their perception of time with breath control so that when they were fighting, they experienced everything in slow motion. And while that's kind of hallucination, it also, you were still functional, which means that your boxing ability was paranormal. And
Well,
that's something Chan Buddhism teaches with Tai Chi.
now are you doing that with compressed breathing, basically, techniques?
Yeah, I started with didgeridoos. Yeah, you start with straws in water, and then once you can do that, where you can blow bubbles and breathe at the same time, where you have a continuous stream of air, then you work with a smaller mouth didgeridoo, and then you can move up to the Aborigine forms. And once you can do continuous breathing, I watched Kenny G once enter a concert where he entered it, the band's up on stage, everybody's wondering where Kenny G is, and all of a sudden you hear this note at the other end of the concert hall, and Kenny G then walks down, 9 minutes going to stage, right through the audience blowing a single note. If you don't think that got everybody up on their feet.
So, and I guess just a couple more questions here, and then we'll let you go. I know that it's getting late for you, and you got.
No, it's okay. You're having fun. Let's go.
So this project that you're working on, that you are basically getting people off of the grid, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, we're starting. I have a project. It's called the Urban Farm Project of North America. And what I did, I started with Chattanooga. Now I'm in Puebla, Mexico, and we're going to do another one up in Vancouver, BC. But basically, in Chattanooga, I was given 12 playgrounds in different parts of the city that were converted into community gardens. And then we brought 400 children in with 60 master gardeners, and the children, 4 to 7 years old, grew a bunch of wildflowers that they then made into wildflower salads, and they went into the streets of Chattanooga and fed the homeless. And it was a small group of children feeding a large group of adults with non-GMO foods. The children were paying it forward. It empowered them, and it showed that food should be part of your infrastructure. And right there, right now, that is the logo of Chattanooga, right here, right now. And Chattanooga today now eats 40% of the food that they grow is eaten in Chattanooga, whereas in San Antonio, I'm going to guess that less than 10% of the food you eat is grown there locally.
Oh, I'm sure you're right. It's unfortunate.
And imagine now the state of Puebla with 4,000 kids working rather than with master gardeners as facilitators, where the third graders mentor the first graders and that kind of thing, like out of Cloud Atlas. What we have now is a bunch of transpersonal psychologists, graduate students, acting as facilitators. That form of psychology seems to be very well suited for children in a mentoring project, and they're going to go feed the homeless in Mexico City. Imagine what's going to happen next there when food is no longer the concern.
Well, and it's good to have an optimistic outlook on things. I certainly hope that the future generations will have an opportunity to do things like that, and it doesn't turn into this cyborg society where everybody.
So what you should do, what each one of us should do, is small baby steps. The way I did it, so you can get the metaphor, I first restored my body like my 280Z. When I put a panel in that had rusted down in my 280Z, I replaced my knee. So everything is done in small steps. And I put my garden in 4 years ago. 3 years ago, I learned how to harvest food from the garden. Last year, I learned how to can. And this year, I'm learning how to eat out of my cupboards. Well, one step at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. Start. That is the empowerment point, is a process. That's, in the Kabbalah, that's path 25. It's a process. It's not a final goal. It's not trying to produce your food. What you're trying to do is move toward sovereignty.
Right. And it sounds to me like you're being the change that you want to see. And
I'm trying to set an example. Watch what I do. This is how I do it. And everybody's different. Has a little nick or cranny and the character. Character and calling. James Hillman. There it is. The soul's code. Each of us does it a little differently. You're not supposed to do it all at once. What you're supposed to do is get up the couch today. Tomorrow you can put your potato chips away, and the next day you can start drinking more water. That kind of thing. One step at a time, and the way Carl Sagan put it, small steps, Allie.
Nice. Well, Rick, thank you so much for spending your time and information with us tonight. I really appreciate it. I'd love to have you back on again with us sometime.
Oh, no, anytime you'd like. I need to sell books, so feel free. I'm what they call a starving artist. And, you know, all my incomes now are if I sell books or not. And I've got a lot of them. I write in agriculture. Last year I did 4 books. This year I have 10 volumes, all sequels. Last year I did the first volume on the Encyclopedia of Alternative Agriculture. There are 5 volumes. I'm coming out with 2 more of those this year. Pantheon, Archetypal Gods in Daily Living. It's a book on tarot. It follows the Modern Alchemist. And Power Tools was last year. I did last year Native Plants of Commercial Importance. This year's sequel will be Forest Farming. No longer about wildcrafting, but farming in the woods, like ginseng and golden seal and things of that nature. You know, down in Mexico, you guys have all kinds of habitat with aloe and other kinds of crops that grow nowhere else in the world. And so you have a barter situation there.
Yeah, wow. So, and also, you know, these herbs and stuff that you talk about that can be used for medicines, a lot of times I've been told in the research that I found in the white papers, they work better than the pharmaceutical stuff.
Well, okay, so I wrote The Magical and Ritual Use of Herbs. It was originally called Legal Highs. I wrote Magical and Ritual Use of Herbs, where I assigned rituals to 28 herbs that were kept because they were sacraments. They had rituals. Because they were sacraments, they kept them out of the Uniform Controlled Substance Act. And that's where your kola nut and guarana seed, and for stimulants came out, ephedra to make Mormon tea, and how to make methamphetamine, you know, from just plants that grow in Texas. You have things like four-winged saltbush over in the Trans-Pecos region that is perfect for potpourri. That flower, by the way, takes a dye better than any other product on earth, and so you have a color wheel with a four-winged saltbush, which is an atrophyte. It grows in salt-tolerant halophyte. It grows in salt-tolerant. It's a salt-tolerant type of plant. And it's all, you know, you've got chaparral. It's a NADGA for cancer. You've got Mormon tea. You can make all kinds of things from that. You know, the ephedra, it's pseudoephedrine hydrochloride. And so what I did is I wrote a book on psilocybin. It had psilocybin mushroom. Did you know that the psilocybin mushroom, because of my book, is not illegal? What is illegal is to have psilocin and psilocybin chemistry extraction and or selling mushrooms. But if you're growing mushrooms in your basement and Texas comes in and arrests you legally, if you know your law well enough, they'll try to bluff you through it, but they cannot convict you for possession. They can convict you if they can show intent to sell.
Interesting. And I mean, that stuff, a lot of times you can find them growing underneath cow patties.
Oh, that's what it's a natural plant. How can you take something like crabgrass and make it illegal?
Well, they did with marijuana for, you know, decades.
Well, that's the difference between making rope and making a cancer drug. And while it may be illegal in where I live, I have a marijuana card. I do my own grow. I don't even try to deal with criminals or other people growing it for me. I just grow my own, just what you would call an herbal pharmacy. And that's a good thing to put in your garden, because if the grid goes down, where are your pharmaceuticals going to come from?
Right.
Well, wakey, wakey. It's time to think about how to make yourself a bit more sovereign, off the grid, so you don't require. Now, with consciousness aside, there's other ways.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry, I just got to jump in here real quick. You said, you know, getting yourself off the grid. How about that guy in Oregon that just is serving 30 days for collecting rainwater?
I know. He's in out of Bedford. You know how the state of Oregon did that one?
How'd that happen?
What falls on the state of Oregon belongs to the state of Oregon. That's BLM and DNR, Department of Natural Resources and BLM. By the way, just on that Bundy Ranch incident, that was China trying to move in and putting in a big solar array, hiring a couple of gangster-like congressmen, that father and son, Reed. One was running for governor and the other is a senator, and they always had a major confrontation. It was exaggerated because there was infiltration, just like there was in Bosnia and just like there was in the Ukraine. It's agendas and false flags. But basically what's going to happen is China is going to take over our utilities. That's how it's going to work.
So China's going to take over the utilities. Well, they've got microchips in almost all the defense systems in the military, so...
You're not even, according to that NASA paper, you're not even going to worry about that kind of thing because it's going to be a whole different class of weapons by then.
I see. Okay.
You know, with that nanochip inside you, and we'll just decide to turn on and turn off certain things. Actually, Morgellons is most likely in all of you, and the only reason you don't have an infection is it is genome specific, and it targets certain genome types. And I never saw it. I've written about it. I've never seen it. And last week, I was at a concert, and someone recognized my hat. I'm starting to, you know, people are recognizing who I am, with a little weird hat I wear and all that. And she came up to me, and she showed me Morgellons. And what I saw would appear to be something that had gone buggy, right? You know, when you get a drug overdose and you see worms coming out of your arm, and you start picking at it, and the next thing you know, you got sores.
Right.
Sores, weird, okay. But I saw that in places on her body that were not, she couldn't touch. So how did that happen? And so I have no question that Morgellons is real. I got called by the Center of Disease Control. A woman, you know, has a bunch of people, and they don't know what to do with it. We're doing cordyceps, which is it's a pharmaceutical mushroom. It's about oxygen and polysaccharides. And we can save that for another show to talk about. But really, nobody has a clue what it really is. It's basically what appears to be a nematode that has become hybridized or mutated with some other weird thing. And I suggested that it was from the Challenger experiments and the nematode that got exposed to the exosphere bacteria. On my way on Facebook this morning, I posted article about spikes and, you know, these little things like Aurora Borealis. And in my community, we believe these are sentient life forms. Short-lived, but they're sentient. They're aware, conscious, like the Aurora Borealis. It is a type of life form. And if you watch the movie Monsters, they're just like that.
Well, so are they like, do you think that they can control the host? Are they influence the individual?
I think not at this stage, maybe in 3 more years, some study in laboratory. That's how quickly it's changing. It's going to be a very different world.
Well, I certainly hope that, you know, if these sociopathic megalomaniacs that control the world decide to, you know, try and nanospray everybody with, you know, nano.
Oh, they already have. That part is already a done deal.
Well, then let's, you know, put these bright minds together, and maybe you can come up with a solution so we can.
We're writing about it now. That's the whole construct and direction of what structured water, easy water, and flowing waters are all about.
Now, is this all available at your website at richardallenmiller.com?
No, some of it is. I'm writing books. My website got hacked. The primary website for my books is oak-publishing.com. And richardallenmiller.com, that's the person visiting me. She is going to start trying to slowly rebuild my website from the way it used to be before my webmaster died. I had a webmaster that worked with me for some years, and we had a killer site. You can go to Wayback Machine and look at my old site, Richard Allen Miller, and you can see that it was extensive. And what happened is it got hacked after he died, and I never had the budget to be able to rebuild it. And now, slowly, I'm trying to rebuild it. So I at least got my books up for sale. You can do that at Oak-Publishing. Because, see, my website was originally written in Joomla, and now it's all about WordPress and, you know, that kind of thing. So we're slowly having to convert everything over. And we'll do it. And that's why you're not promoted on this show was not promoted on my website yet. However, it did go on Facebook, and I have quite a bit of traffic there. So, you know, stay tuned.
A very special thank you to our guest tonight. For all of you that had the opportunity to be here with us, if you enjoyed the show, follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/clandestine-timelord, for the most recent interviews, videos, and podcasts. Or you can check us out on the World Wide Web, www.leakproject.com. Would you like to be a guest on our show? Do you have information that the world needs to see and hear? Send us an email, guestbookings@leakproject.com. Thank you, everybody. This is Rex Bear with Leak Project. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. Good night. inside the Borg. And free from the hive mind, this is Rex Bear, hosting Lead Project. The Lead Project was created to offer awareness and information not found in the mainstream news. With over 90% of the world's media controlled by only 6 enormous conglomerates, many people today are looking for more accurate information. The Leak Project offers a refreshing approach to the brain-trained media. Check back daily for new content as we thrive to bring you the cutting edge in news, current events, on-scene video footage, interviews, and most importantly, the truth.
Rick, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So, if you could, real quick, these documents that came out about with NASA, where did you get access to those? I mean, is that just something?
It went viral on the internet this last year. Look, this kind of document comes out every 20 years. The original one that you saw at a federal press in a book called Secret and Suppressed was called Secret Weapons for Silent Wars. And it basically ran down how they were going to use the monetary system. This came out in the early 80s and basically outlined how money was going to be used as a weapon. And, with the petrodollar and Russia forming with Iran and China, and now pulling all their money out of the banks, watch what happens next. And the NASA document is actually talking about the war after next. And it's military deaths. They say that right out in the beginning. And they outline it, and it was generally written for a whole series of agencies, and it's called, the title of the document is called The Bots, Borgs, and Humans Welcome You to 2025 AD. And this was put together by a group of scientists that are top end in each of their fields, projecting in terms of what current research is doing and where it is right now and where it's going to be in 25 years. And then by the year 2050, humans will not probably exist in a physical form. We'll be more virtual. Now, I know that everybody's concerned about Fukushima and radiation and the background count and geoengineering and GMOs and fracking and all these different things. You're going to see an increase in all of that with changes occurring not in years but in months now. It's going to be like the quickening. And so that's in the title, was The Borgs, The Bots, and Humans Welcome You. Now, the reason, and it has a list of all the different DODs and other things they're putting together, and I particularly liked their summation of where we are at this moment, page 8. Spaceship Earth. That means if you looked at the Earth as a closed system, the crew are plundering the ship supplies, tinkering with the temperature and light support controls, looking for an instruction manual, engaging in bloody skirmishes at every corner of the vessel, and increasing the size of the crew by 2 million people per week. That about sum it up?
It does. And some people might consider it a prison plan.
That's the beginning of this 114-page, actually it's a PowerPoint presentation with 114 pages, running it down, that's page 8. It gets downhill from there. And it actually runs it down accurately. Of the planet, there will be global warming, pollution, deforestation, huge public works like the Three Gorges Dam. On the human species, there will be genomic design and repair and mind children. In products and life forms, there'll be cross-species molecular breeding and directed evolution. That's page 9. It goes on in building up the premises for the projections that it's going to use. And really, when you realize that, what are we going to do with the background radiation in San Antonio, Texas, where you live right now? Your background radiation is a minimum of 300% or 3 times what it was prior to Fukushima.
Well, let me add something to that, if I can, real quick, because after Fukushima, I did go out and buy a military-grade Geiger counter watch, actually, Special Forces watch, that does show the microsieverts per hour. And it actually has been staying consistent since I bought it at 0.08 microsieverts per hour. I have the opportunity to travel the country, and it does fluctuate, especially up in Columbia, Missouri, for some reason. During the day, it'll be 0.15, and then in the afternoon, it goes down to about half of that. But when I flew to Anchorage last year, it got up to 55 times what it normally is in the air from...
Wait, some of that is because it's in the atmosphere and brought down by weather. Listen, there is a cloud of radiation floating above the Earth in the ionosphere right now. It's It's creepy. And all the particulate went up in the air, and where it falls, the original things were showing plants like dandelion going rogue on you. And then they started noticing that different things were happening along the coastline. Nothing that we're being told is real. Information is no longer about the truth. Basically, information is now more or less a new form of weapon, and that the internet is probably where the first battlegrounds are occurring right now.
Well, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead and comment. I can rattle on and on. So, go ahead and interrupt me. That's fine, please.
I appreciate that. We just have so many questions to ask you, and there's so
that's
much.
Cool.
Okay. So, it talks about no pixie dust, robots, cyborgs, humans. Now, page 4, and then it gets to page 9. Humans have taken over and vastly shortened evolution, directed evolution. So is that somewhat of a eugenics mindset, these people that are controlling?
Well, those are the 3 areas of explosion in technology right now. It's an information transfer, and we're going to talk about that with exclusion zone water and this new fullerene product that's coming out of Russia. But basically, it's information transfer, genome exploration now. We're messing with the genome on a level that you have no idea. It's no longer about GMOs. We're actually doing some very strange things with genome exploration, and then nanotechnology. And where those 3 meet is going to be where the transhumanism aspects come into full play. Now, if you were an alien and you wanted to invade Earth, I'm just doing a metaphor here, where would you hide in plain sight if there were, let's say, rules of engagement? That means that there's rules that you have to, to take over Earth. There's certain rules because of good aliens and the ugly aliens. There's good, bad, and ugly. If you're an alien, where would you hide in plain sight? Most of the scientific community now believe that is the 4th genome type in blood that is non-human that now makes Homo sapiens sapiens. We have Neanderthal and other blood types in there, and then we have that 4th gene that's an alien gene that we don't know where it came from. A lot of conspiracists and things talk about the Anunnaki and, those kinds of things. But for me, the metaphor is, that is what made you God's favored, is that you have a choice, and you're being distracted. And so the war for Earth, metaphorically, could be seen as going on inside each of us.
Well,
and that's accurate. That's the scientific community that now would see what, from the big picture, that is what's going on. In other words, if you want to change this world, you're going to have to start with yourself. The battle is going on inside you. You know what you're supposed to do. It's different for each of us. And sometimes it might seem as if we're in conflict with each other, but that could be the fact that we're in 4th grade, and the rest of it is God's will, and we don't see the big picture. And so with that, what you can do, not make judgment on another, but mind your own ship. And that's why the saints, all through history, have talked about training the mind. That's what I did with Navy SEALs. We started with working with the gut, how to think instinctively rather than with your logic brain. Your upper brain is there basically to make all your beliefs true.
Right.
And so I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. Now, the gut, on the other hand, your intuitions, is outside space and time. It has somehow connected. We're going to talk about how that might work with genome memory types in terms of imprint on the DNA, so that you have past and future life. You can actually hypnotize somebody and take them into a future life. That's kind of interesting. And there's a project called the Wernicke Correction and the Mars Project, where if you take any person on Earth, that means cross-culturally, like Chinese, and you hypnotize them, you take them down into the Wernicke Correction part of the brain, all will have memory of working on Mars for the U.S. government. How does that work?
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, it would suggest that there's something more going on than just the physical plane here. And that's where we started. And basically, the physical plane could be seen as a place where you go to be sick spiritually. You got fever, and your experience of reality is fever. What happens in the physical world is what is supposed to happen, whether you go kicking and screaming or in the flow. And that is called your purpose. And what you need to do is get more in touch with yourself and not be distracted with cars and things that you're not going to be able to take with you when you move on. What you can take with you
is your education.
Right.
And so,
memories.
Yeah, there you go. Now you're getting the big picture. And so with Common Core and the directions we're doing in education, what do you think that's all about? Well, there's another distraction. And, you know, the children today have no role models. Like when I was in Mexico, I went down as far as Puebla and did some seminars with transpersonal psychology, and then did a big project like in agriculture. And really, that Mexico City was creepy. I have never seen anything like those in terms of solid ghettos going from 100 miles of solid ghetto, and all the different neighborhoods had walls, and they had their white slavery, drugs, crime, whatever. Yet, all the children were happy, and the family mother was intact. And that's what's lost in America right now. And really what's happening now is that the children have no role model. You can't change this world. What you can do is change yourself, and your children are watching you. And that's why Unite, all of us now need to get off the couch and start walking our talk. This NASA document is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a physics thing, and it basically is projecting where we're going as we see this technology in these three areas unfolding for us. And this document walks you through that to show you how it's going to be. It's quite a different universe. You worry about the end of the earth, you know, the apocalypse. We're always worried about the apocalypse. That's Joseph Campbell, when he said, when you see the kingdom of the Father on earth, the apocalypse has already occurred. It's perpetual in its potential. I mean, Nostradamus was saying it, the Bible, throughout. It's a part of man's collective unconscious. It's always part of the soup. And so it's going to always be there, including Fukushima radiation. This background variation, is that 3 times, you know, going up to 105 and then down to normal 40 or whatever the counts are out here on the West Coast. Is that bad or good? We don't really know. What we can do is look what's happening in Japan right now in the prefect of Tokyo and the epidemic of thyroid cancer. That's pretty straightforward. We can see what happened at Chernobyl is now happening at Fukushima. It's a black slime mold. There's life forms that thrive in high gamma ray radiation. Probably that's another alien. Who knows? It's crazy to realize that the probably 1% that's running this show are probably not even human. Basically, what I'm going to suggest is they at least represent the least human aspects of what we would deem noble in man. You know, love, charity, compassion, empathy. Those words that we use, the top 1%, and actually it's not 1%, it's 7 basic families, 4 of which are Rothschilds.
Well, let me jump in on that while you're talking about this, if I may. I think this is important. So the 4 family lines that are basically controlling the show right now, the cinema here, it does seem that everything in the media, when these big events happen, that they're portrayed sometimes days, weeks, months, years before the event happens, but very meticulously. And it seems that they run on certain dogmatic principles and rituals when these events happen. Being metaphysical that you are, and knowing as much as you know, would you say that these elitist families or people that do control the show and start the wars and everything are doing it not only for physical but metaphysical purposes, entities that might be controlling them behind the scenes?
I have no idea. That'd make a good X-File like I used to. That would make a good X-File. But I'll tell you what I do know. I do know that its money is not real. It's a theatrical prop. What's real is your labor. And there are movements now across the country. Besides Bitcoin, there's permacredits.com. That's a community-supported agriculture kind of concept where you invest in your neighborhood. And Cornell right now has a work chit for graduate students. If they teach a laboratory, they get so many work chits they can spend anywhere in town for food, bedding, or utilities. And it's a local infrastructure kind of thing. And everybody's different because we have a different value systems in different neighborhoods. Dennis Kucinich, someone I work for, what I do now, I'm at 70, is I network rural communities and bunkers for congressmen. I go in and I fine-tune them. And Kucinich says that the United States is going to fragment down into 9 provinces. Nine
east of the
provinces.
Midwest. What?
9 provinces.
Well,
Did you get the
yeah,
details on that?
Texas has got its own grid. Watch what happens. Who secedes from this union first?
Is that why they're letting the borders pretty much wide open?
I'll tell you what I do know about that part. Everything is a false flag. And like Flight 370, did it happen this way or that way? All of the above. We already know you can't lose an aircraft, so how come they haven't found it? Okay, and if Boeing has already come forward and said they can control that aircraft, take control over the pilot from space. Okay, that black box, that was done in 2007. There's links. So that's a given. So what actually happened at 370? What actually happened at Sandy Hook? What actually happened at Hurricane Sandy?
Right.
Okay, you will never really know because I, for example, have been to Antarctica. I have seen the Nazi base. Where's that in the history books? How does that work?
Wow. What did that look like?
What?
The base.
You mean Antarctica?
No, well,
There it was. I went there in '72. I was there primarily. That was one of that I wasn't the lead, even though I'm a physicist. They brought me in because of the bioluminescence. They wanted to know how the light was worked down there. It's a cavern below the hot springs, probably a mile high with clouds, weather. And there's a Nazi base. Yes, it'll hold 19 submarines. Oh, what's that over there? That is a 14th century Viking base. They've been there in Antarctica for many centuries. I was talking when I did the red ice a couple years back. Some guy from England called me. He was 10 years